Welcome to a very special episode of Bicycle Retail Radio brought to you by the NBDA. I am NBDA President Heather Mason. While we typically stick to an audio recording of our podcast, I have asked today's guest for the privilege of recording the conversation so we can share with the industry in multiple formats. The guest and topic for today's episode are very near to my heart. With an industry working tirelessly on inclusivity and accommodation for diversity and ridership, I am hopeful retailers and the like will find the conversation today of great value. Joining me today is Kailey Kornhauser. She is a PhD candidate studying outcomes and power dynamics of collaborative forest governance in the state of Oregon. She is also a cycling advocate doing work to create more body size inclusivity in all types of bicycling. As an advocate, she has written articles and hosted workshops on the topics of body size inclusivity and cycling, and was most recently featured in the Shimano film, All Bodies on Bikes. This conversation is about her journey and helping retailers offer incredible service while meeting the needs of larger-bodied riders. Welcome, Kaylee. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh man, it's been a couple weeks since we spoke, since we first connected, and I'm really excited for the conversation today. I've been thinking over rides and on runs and hikes the past couple of weeks about all the positiveness is going to come out of our conversation today and how something like this has never been done before. So I thought first we would jump into the film. And so I think I looked last night and there's like a little over 220,000 views of the video that Shimano made, All Bodies on Bikes. And I watched it myself. I'm a huge fan, and it's literally changing the idea of what it means to be a cyclist. And it follows you and your friend on an incredible bikepacking trip. And I mean, how are you feeling about this response?
It's amazing. I hoped it would be as positive as it is, but it's kind of exceeded expectations, just how much positive feedback and industry response and individual response that we've gotten has been it's just been amazing. And from all corners of biking, from people who are brand new and people who have biked forever, from pro racers. I would never expect this message to connect with certain people, but it really has. So it's just been overwhelming and positive.
I remember when the video first came out, and I run a women's cycling team, and I just heard rumors like, have you seen this? Have you seen this? Have you seen this? So it's definitely something that hasn't been done before, and it's caught the industry off guard. And yeah, the response has been incredible. Thank you for sharing your journey in that video. That was incredible.
Thanks for watching.
All right, so last we spoke, I just want to give a little bit of our viewers and listeners a little bit about you. I think last we spoke, you were planning for a wedding, or
Yes.
Just a little bit about who are you and where are you located and what is your day-to-day situation?
I'm married now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I live in Corvallis, Oregon, and I am a PhD student here at Oregon State University, and I study forestry, and I work in a national forest. So I spend a lot of time in the forest, but I also spend a lot of time on my bike. That's what I like to do. That's how I get to work and the grocery store, and also how I have fun. So pretty awesome to live in a place where I can access biking mountain biking, gravel biking in the forest right from my front door. So that's kind of the day to day. Yeah, I have a little dog. That's kind of it.
I have not. I was totally interrupting you, but I haven't biked there, and I totally want to come and ride sometime. All I've heard is incredible things about Oregon.
You've got to come up, and I'll take you out. It's unbelievable. I moved here from Utah, and it has, Utah's got amazing biking too, but this is a little bit more my style. So I really feel lucky that I ended up here for grad school. It's kind of a bike wonderland.
So I feel now I need to know, how did the cycling, the passion for cycling begin?
Yeah, I biked, as a little kid, a lot of people learn how to bike, around the neighborhood, but I grew up in suburban Chicago. Biking's not really a big thing, or at that time it wasn't. And so then in college, moved to Utah, and I didn't have, access to a car, and I didn't live near a grocery store, and I had to get to work. And all of a sudden I was like, okay, I kind of need a bike to get to these places. So started out I just needed to get around and commute. But I was lucky to have a few friends who in college were really into biking and kind of helped me transition biking from just being like a way to get around town to something where I was like, wow, this is really fun, and it's not just for like little kids. And so like then I started thinking, oh, maybe I want to bike, and knew a couple people who were doing like kind of early days bike packing and also bike touring. And I think I thought like, well, I'm never going to be really fast. Like I was already a person in a larger body. Like I was already like a backpacking and kayaking guide, and I was always the slowest one at that. And I was like, I'm going to be slow at this, but if I go far, maybe I could be one, pretty good at being like the furthest or like the best endurance athlete at biking, I guess. So got really into like overnight cycling, and that's kind of where I felt like it really became this like intense passion rather than just like a way to get to work, which I loved getting to work that way, but it's been like obviously now kind of consumed my life.
I love how cycling can have so many different like facets in our life, and I'm totally relating when you're talking about the endurance part of it, because I'm with you on that. Like when I was trying to race like pro cross country, no, but to go long distances, it was more of like a challenge for myself. It was like a personal
Totally
thing.
It's like seeing how long I could go, and it wasn't in like a race setting, just like, wow, how far on a map could I get? Like the first time I rode across a state and was like, wow, I rode across, it was Iowa, and I was like, wow, I rode across this whole state like on a map. It looks like a pretty big distance, and like, I mean, I didn't like win anything or break any records, but it was still like, wow, a big accomplishment.
Did you do RAGBRAI?
Yeah. Yeah,
So.
RAGBRAI was my first like multi-day. I had done some one night things, but that was my first multi-day ride, and that kind of kicked off like, it definitely showed me what I was capable of. And if you've gone to RAGBRAI, it's just like so many different types of people and so inclusive, and it's just like a rolling party. So that also kind of, it helped me realize like, oh, I don't have to be a Lance Armstrong spandex guy to ride a bike. Like I hadn't really known anything else until that. So that was pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, I haven't done that one, but it's on the list. And, as we're chatting here, I'm just thinking about like one of my favorite things to do is like open up paper maps and put them on the table and be like, okay, I'm going to do this loop today.
Yeah.
And, I think as like cyclists, and I know a lot of other women cyclists, like that is, instead of racing, it's like choosing your own adventure and meeting those goals, right? Isn't that awesome to do?
So awesome. Like, yeah, picking routes. I love just like finding lines on a map and hoping it works out. Like, especially with gravel biking, it's like, it can be like a real crapshoot. Like you just kind of hope that the roads are bikeable.
It's all in the adventure, right? Like
It's a total adventure.
I'm so with you on that. We should definitely ride.
We should.
Right. So let's talk about the advocacy part. So you're cycling, you're finding that you're enjoying it more. How did that start? And were you advocating for larger bodies on bikes prior to the Shimano film?
Yeah, 1 second. My dog is sleep barking.
I love it.
Okay, he's awake now. Sorry about that. He's quiet when he's awake, but he barks when he's asleep.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so anyways, I got into advocacy right after RAGBRAI. I wrote my first piece. It was really just like a private piece of writing as part of my master's program about the experience of being a larger person riding a bike. And it was my first time ever writing about being fat, and that's a word I use to identify myself, is that I'm a person in a larger body, and I use the word fat to identify that. And I did that for the first time in writing there, and felt like this sense of kind of like liberation, I guess, or freedom from identifying that way. And then I kept writing and got the opportunity through Instagram to write an article for Bicycling Magazine about being a person in a larger body and bike packing. And
Weren't
that
you on
and
the cover, Kaylee? Weren't you like?
Yeah, that ended.
It was really cool.
It ended up being the cover story. So then from there, I felt like I got all these opportunities. Oh my gosh, my dog never, can you hear that?
I can't, no.
Okay, he never makes noise, and now
No.
anyways, so from there I got a lot more opportunities to do things like host workshops, teach classes. I met Marley Blonsky through Instagram around the time I started writing about my experiences, and she was doing the same. And she's the other cyclist in the All Bodies on Bikes film. So we started working together and doing workshops together. And then that's kind of when we got the opportunity to make the film. And I could leave it there for now.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how did the film, that's my next question. How did the film come about?
Yeah, so right after the magazine cover came out, I have a couple friends from college who are filmmakers, and one of them is a director, and he reached out and said, I think this would be a great topic for a film. I'd love to film you and Marley giving a workshop, and this is all pre-COVID, and we were planning on traveling around, giving workshops and hosting group rides, and so the film was really going to be about that. But then, of course, COVID happened right around the time when Shimano agreed to fund and make the film happen. And so we had to really change gears. And so we ended up saying, let's do a bikepacking trip and do what we can given the circumstances. And so my friend, the director, and then two other producers came up and met me and Marley in Corvallis, and the five of us did what we could to be safe. We all quarantined before, and then, met only outside. And the fortunate thing about biking, as so many of us know, is that it is outside and pretty spaced out. So we were able to be pretty safe and then isolated when we had to be inside. So we made it happen.
What an amazing journey. Could you ever have foreseen that you'd be making a film that would be so widely viewed, right? It's crazy where our journey takes us. And so the workshops you were doing, so they were in stores to help people. Explain to me what the workshops are.
Sure. Yeah, we do a bunch of different workshops. Some of the workshops are geared at the public, and different versions of the public, just general audiences or people who are getting into cycling for the first time. But we also do workshops for companies. We do workshops on marketing, like how to market and create an inclusive culture for people in larger bodies and people of all sizes. And then we also do workshops for people who work in stores and how they should interface with people in larger bodies, and tips and ideas about how to make that a more comfortable space for everybody. So we've kind of, the workshops, we started with just one or two, and now since the film, we've been doing many more workshops and many more types of workshops as we go.
I'm imagining. And I really wanted to chat with you today because I feel like, out of our initial conversation, you and I came to collectively that we could really have a great conversation on how retailers can make their store more welcoming to larger body riders. And there's something back to the film, just the term cyclist, what a cyclist is. I feel like the film has really opened this up for discussion, and the industry's looking at it different. And I think that definition needs to evolve. There's a quote, and I know other publications have picked up on this, early in the movie or in the film, that said, to be a cyclist, you just have to be a person riding a bike. Being fast is not what makes you an experienced rider. And I mean, that's true. It could be anyone's a cyclist, right?
Totally.
It needs to evolve. And I'm so happy that we're having this conversation and that we're now seeing new riders coming into the sport. So hopefully it'll allow the term cyclist to evolve. It's not just someone kitted up racing like the Tour de France, right?
Yeah, and so many of us already rode bikes and just didn't consider ourselves cyclists. When I commuted to work, and I still do, but when I was only doing that, I was still a cyclist, but I wouldn't have ever called myself a cyclist or thought of myself as part of some bike community. So I think expanding that word and meeting people where they're at, if they don't think they're a cyclist, okay, well, you're a person who rides a bike, you're still part of this community too, even if you don't want to call yourself a cyclist, because I know there's some people have an aversion to that word. I believe we can make it more inclusive.
I'm with you. And we've been talking so much about how bicycle retailers take such a active role in the transformation of a person's journey. Like they walk into a bike shop and they want to become a cyclist. They want to ride a bike. They want to experience the thrill that you and I experience. And so a retailer can make it or break it literally on the first visit, right? Like,
yes.
So I want to dive into, how retailers can enhance a rider's experience and some of the ways that you think that you would help retailers to move that needle forward. But I just want to think back to maybe some of your experiences walking into bike stores or your overall experience with bicycle retailers and finding gear for larger bodied cyclists. Can you give me some, thoughts there about what you've experienced in the past, possibly?
Yeah, I think, my first time buying a bike as an adult was at a bike collective, like a nonprofit, the Salt Lake Bicycle Collective. And that, bike collectives and bike nonprofits, I think in general, have done a lot of work to make an inclusive feeling space. And part of that is like the price of the used bikes is cheaper, so that as a college student I could afford it, but also they are there with tools and they're ready to teach you how to do things. And for me, that was like the level I was going to be comfortable at as a college student. But when it came time for me to buy like my first like big girl bike, I wanted to buy so badly like a Surly steel bike, and it was like part of the bike culture I was in was that people rode like cool steel bikes, and I wanted to like be in it. And so finding the right shop, like I was pretty intimidated by going into a bike shop as like, I don't know really much about bikes. I don't consider myself yet a cyclist, whatever that means. But I was lucky to have a few friends who helped point me in the right direction to a shop in Salt Lake where I got my bike. And there, I mean, if I think back to that experience, it was so pivotal. If I had walked in and been treated like the way I have later been treated in different shops, I don't know if I would have been where I am now. When I walked in, I was treated with so much respect, and the shop, it was all white males in the shop, but they decided to treat me like they were just so psyched that I wanted to get a bike from them and that I was going to join like their crew, kind of like they made me feel like I was joining their club in a way that made me feel like I was already a part of the bike community before I even got the bike in. Like,
so awesome. I have like literally goosebumps right now.
Yeah, like they just were so amazing. And then they continued to be amazing. Like I came in, I got a flat tire the first day I got the bike, and I brought it in and they were like devastated for me and like fixed it immediately. Like we're so sad that had happened on my first day with the bike. And then from then on, like if I brought the bike in and needed something pretty quickly, they just always made me feel like didn't have a stupid request. Like nothing was too low level for them. And I just like still I feel like that got like gave me the courage and confidence to be like, yeah, I'm a cyclist, like these guys think I am, and they're like so cool, So I think that goes a really long way. And like now, I mean, I can share some more negative experiences I've had, like going into a shop, and I was being given a bike by Specialized, so it was a free bike, but I needed to get it through a Specialized dealer. And I went into a Specialized bike shop, and or a bike shop that sells Specialized, and they the guy said, how did you get Specialized to give you a free bike? And and so that wasn't great. That made me feel that kind of the opposite, like, oh, this guy doesn't think I'm like in the bike community,
right?
And has like seen my body and made an assumption about me not being a cyclist. I didn't look like a person that Specialized would be giving a bike to. And then the same shop, the bike was being given to me to go on a very long bike packing trip, and they all knew that. And yet when I got to the store to pick the bike up, the guy passing it over to me, decided to like explain to me what bike packing was, and it turned out he had only gone on one overnight trip before. Like that was it. And so I was like, well, don't you think if Specialized is giving me a bike, I've probably been on a couple bike packing trips.
Right? And you're like walking in there feeling like I'm going in to pick up my bike. They're gonna be
Yeah,
like
so
so
excited.
pumped to see who this person is who's getting this bike.
Yes. And then it was just like a total letdown, you know, and those are two individuals. That's not the shop at all. It was two
Yeah.
different, you know, two individuals I mean, if that had been my first experience, I would have felt crushed, because you go in thinking they're going to be excited for you. And then if they are, it's amazing. And if they aren't, it's really tough, I think. And even if it wasn't because of my body size or because I'm a woman, it felt like it was. Like, that's how I left. I left feeling like, wow, they think I'm not a biker because I'm like a fat woman, you know?
Yeah.
And so anyways, that's a long-winded answer to your question. Just like, it does have a huge difference. You know, how you walk in and how you're treated has a huge difference on what ends up happening.
Yeah. And, you know, I guess this is a good time to throw out, like, you know, this conversation can be uncomfortable. You know, it can be uncomfortable for people to talk about body weight or age or anything. It just makes us as humans uncomfortable, right? So we don't want to be inconsiderate. Like, we don't want to say the wrong thing. And I mean, we're in a live recording today, so I'm just going to be like my authentic self, but I might not say the right thing. And I'm going to apologize to you, to our listeners, to anyone. I have my best intentions here, but you know, it is something that I want to make sure that I phrase everything appropriately. And I'm hopeful that today, that this conversation, you can give retailers some of the tools maybe to do that too. So I just want to say that, Kaylee, like I'm trying my best here, but it's hard. It's an uncomfortable situation to talk about things that, I don't know, we normally avoid, right? Like
Totally. And we're all like learning. I think for a lot of people, this is like the first time they're ever talking about body size in like this type of way that isn't like as an insult or like under a hushed breath, you know, like just talking openly about it. It's uncomfortable because we all have a body, we all have feelings about our bodies, we all want our bodies to look or do different things than they do, and so I understand that. And anybody who's trying, I think, you know, we can't, you know, we can get our feelings hurt, sure, but we're all learning together. That's kind of the point. I don't get it perfect all the time.
right.
You'll hear me say like people in larger bodies or bigger people when I refer to other people, and then I use the word fat when I refer to myself. That word fat has a lot of negative connotations, and people are pretty uncomfortable using it. I would never use the word fat to describe somebody else that hasn't already invited me to do that. Like, unless they've used the word and identified that I should be using it too, that word carries so much with it that I think it's at this point probably inappropriate to call someone else fat without their explicit permission. But I think it's okay to start talking about bigger people and, you know, people in larger bodies and people in extended or plus sizes objectively, because we'll talk about it in this conversation, we've got to talk about it and be more open about it, to make biking more inclusive and safe and welcoming.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we're gonna get into it, and I have questions about like considerations for safety that we have to really talk about, that if we don't, we're actually doing like harm. Like to all right, so let's just get into it. For retailers who are listening, who are ready to expand the definition of cyclist and open the doors to all diversity in riders of all sizes, how, like in your opinion, how could they make their retail store more accepting to invite larger bodies in? Are
Yeah,
there areas to focus on, like messaging, staff training, product mix? So that's what
I
I'm
think
thinking.
those are the three big things. I think with messaging and culture, I think the idea of making sure that there's, you know, pictures or even staff members in larger bodies, like something that visually indicates to people in larger bodies that they are invited into the space. I don't think people like consciously know that they need that, but if you go to a website, like a clothing website, as a person in a larger body, if you don't see other people in large bodies on the website, you assume that there's no clothes in your size. And the same thing is true for physical retail stores. I know not all bike stores really specialize in providing clothing, but even having pictures of people who aren't necessarily like athlete looking people, and I know that a lot of stores aren't in control of the photos that they receive to post in their stores, but trying to pick the ones that look a little bit more like an everyday person. If there is a picture of someone in a larger body, like featuring that photo in your store window, that type of thing invites people in. I also think, again, product mix is pretty tricky because it is not up to retail stores to provide the physical equipment and clothing that accommodates people in larger bodies. It's really up to the companies that make those products. And it's going to take a while before we see some of the changes on bike weight limits and extended size clothing. Once we do see those changes though, and it might be a few years, even if you aren't a store that features a lot of clothing, like having just one or two options in that extended size, I've never been able to go to a small bike shop and see an article of clothing in my size. So I have to exclusively shop online, which isn't the end of the world, but I'd love to buy the same product at a bike shop and support my local bike shop. So I think when possible, having a product mix is great. But also, if you can't do that, which the reality is right now, there's not that many products that you can have in your store, knowing where to point people online probably doesn't feel great as a small bike shop to point people to an online retailer. But knowing, here's where there is an online store for people in larger bodies for bike shorts, it feels really good then, like, oh, they thought about me at least, even if they can't have the product here in the store. And then I think the biggest difference is in staff training and learning how to talk about body size and bikes and talk about weight in a way that is objective and makes people safer but not, feel offended is really key. And then just, in general, trying to cultivate a store atmosphere that is welcoming, which is going to serve all of us. I'm sure you all talk about this.
Yeah, no, this is some great little nuggets that you just put in there. And, I'm thinking back to the apparel and when I used to have a store and, I'd have a woman come in and, I wanted to help her. I literally wanted to help her, but there was not many options for anything I had or even had access to. But yeah, a small win was finding something online and directing her there. But we did it together. So she was still my customer and she knew I had her best intentions at heart,
Absolutely. Or if you're able to order it through the store, I would 100% agree to order something through a store if someone did that, went the extra mile and showed me that product. So it's okay not to have it in store. I think right now people understand, and especially this year and the next few years, probably it's going to be hard to get physical products into stores.
Yeah. And then for staff training, maybe a good start is to watch our video when we're done. That's a simple start. All right. So Kaylee, I'm thinking about, and I don't know if this is appropriate to compare, but this is just me being me. I'm thinking about NICA, and NICA's done so much to bring kids into cycling. And then I'm thinking about all the work that's been done to bring women. We have women's rides, women's workshops. Is it wrong to do something special for larger bodies? Or is that a way that retailers could say, we're welcoming and we're accepting? Or is it just group rides? I don't know. You're looking at me like I'm crazy. So
No, I think it's such a good question. It's something I don't know if I have the answer to. I think in bigger cities, having a ride, group ride, especially for people in larger bodies might work really well. In my town of 50,000, I'm thinking would that work? But I think there's so many other things you can do to invite people in larger bodies to spaces that have already been created, like a women's specific space, making sure that if you're doing group rides, those group rides have clearly posted routes, miles per hour that are stuck to, no drop options, waiting at the top of hills for people, not assuming that size of rider indicates experience, those types of things that you publish, like be pretty forward with the fact as a shop, if you're doing a group ride, I think you can be pretty forward with the fact that you're doing that, you're being so explicit about those things to invite people of all abilities and sizes and ages. Like say that. Like you can be explicit, like
okay.
And I don't know if it will be possible for many shops to create like an affinity space for people in larger bodies, because that might not, it might feel a little scary for people. If you are a shop that has people in larger bodies that work there, or people in your community in larger bodies, like putting them in leadership roles, having them lead a group ride, or a shop in town here is having me give a talk about a local bike packing route. And so I don't know this to be true, but if I was a person, an attendee, and I saw, oh, this person in a larger body is giving the talk, I would think, wow, this place like accepts people in larger bodies if they're putting one of us up for a speaking position, and then in terms of like guides and like, well, you didn't ask this explicitly, but we are working on putting together like a resource guide of different bike shops that have been like explicitly friendly to people in larger bodies. We'd love, if people are listening, for them to send their contact in, because we get questions all the time from people in larger bodies saying, hey, what shop should I go to? And of course, I don't know all the shops in the country or the world. And so just knowing where to send people, where, I'm sure many shops that are friendly to people in larger bodies won't be on our list, but just knowing like that there's some that have said like, hey, you're welcome here, I think it goes a long way.
I love that. And yeah, so anyone listening who wants to get on that list, we'll give Kaylee's information at the end, but you can also send it to me and I'll make sure it gets to her. And I'm just thinking as we're chatting, like we as an industry, we as retailers, we have as staff employees, we have the ability to really put someone on the right track, to make the experience like we said. And I think it's also bad to have the assumption that larger bodied people aren't as strong. Like I had my butt kicked by some larger bodied people, right? So we're not saying that, this cyclist is slower or not capable. It's
totally.
just they have a larger body and, need specific equipment. And so let's talk about that assumption. So I'm nervous that sometimes some people might walk into a bicycle store and maybe the staff or the employees think that person's not a cyclist, or maybe they need like a mountain bike and not a road bike, or they just make an assumption. How can we, like, is there any practices that you would suggest for employees to steer clear of, or maybe focus on to be best in this case?
I mean, I think it's a rule in general, like don't assume people's ability level based on like how they look, or even like what bike they ride. Like we make a lot of assumptions. I'm guilty of this about people, the type of biking they do, the experience they have, based on what we see. And, I can't tell you the number of shop group rides I've gone on where people will be like, oh, is this your first group ride? Or like, are you just getting into cycling? And so like that type of comment doesn't make you feel like part of the community, So I think immediately trying to like check those initial assumptions we make. But then also, I might have you like restate the question, but I think this answers it. Like starting to talk about weight pretty openly when we're working with customers. And maybe I'll have you restate the question.
Yeah, but that's kind of what I'm thinking, what I'm asking, and maybe I didn't phrase it properly either, because I'm really just kind of all over a little bit. But I don't want retailers or staff members to assume that this person is not a cyclist, or maybe point them the wrong direction, or be afraid to talk about it. Like I feel like the only time that we're able to talk about weight and we feel comfortable about it is like when we're talking about like shock or fork setup, right?
Totally.
So, like, how can we, like, what's the best practice? Like, don't be afraid, don't make assumptions, right? Like this is what I'm saying.
And you mentioned like making assumptions and then pointing people towards a certain bike. Like so many people in larger bodies come to me after buying like a hybrid fitness bike that they were pointed towards, probably based on some assumptions made about them. And then that turns out it wasn't the right bike for them, Like they were hoping to get into road biking or gravel biking or needed a full suspension mountain bike, but they ended up with like a fitness hybrid. Nothing wrong with a fitness hybrid. It probably works for a ton of people in larger bodies, but using a certain bike as a catch-all. And I know one of the reasons we do this is because some bikes have higher weight limits than others. I think being upfront, just as you would be about any other aspect of a bike, when you're selling it to someone on the store floor, telling them every other stat about it. You also want to talk about, and you already do probably, what the frame is made out of. And at that point, I think that's when you can start to say, like, and here we've got a carbon bike, like the weight limits on these tend to be lower. It's a good opportunity to then, and offer the fact of what is the structural weight limit of this bike. Knowing those weight limits, I mean, I don't think many people, most customers aren't aware that bikes have weight limits. I would say I didn't know until many years into riding a bike that my bikes had weight limits, and I exceeded some of those weight limits. So being pretty open with that while you're stating every other fact about it, what's the tire clearance, what component set does it have on it, and what's the structural weight limit, like just including it in the information you're providing, and making it known, like, if this bike doesn't work for you, we also have a steel bike or an aluminum bike that's gonna have a higher weight limit or have these other features to it. So instead of asking the person like outright, what do you weigh, and then telling them what bikes that work for them, I think it's more natural and makes more sense to offer up facts about the bike in an organic way, and then let the customer say, oh, you know what, that carbon road bike doesn't work for me. Do you have a bike made of a different material that's similar to this? And then finding what works for them, in a really similar way that we do shocks. Like the way that we talk about shocks, we usually give like an example of a rider or say, here's the weight range, you tell me what works for you. So we know some of this stuff, but it's just entering it into the bike purchasing conversation.
Yeah, I'm also thinking that a retailer shouldn't be scrambling when a larger bodied rider comes in. Like they should have already done some research so they know what products they can suggest, right? And the staff
Totally.
should be educated as well, right? Like
Yes,
I'm
and
sure
it's not easy to find the weight limit in the handbook. Like it's pretty hidden. Like, so it takes a little bit of time, but even having like a chart just on the table ready to go, and maybe you don't know it, obviously you're not going to probably know off the top of your head like all the weight limits for the bikes in your shop, but being able to like quickly reference, like, it takes the pressure off of that, because it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable and it's going to be more uncomfortable if it takes a long time to figure out what the weight limit is. So the faster, like the more prep you can do, the better.
Yeah, I feel like people should be ready, especially with like wheels and frames and just knowing what they have access to, because there's nothing like just standing there being like, oh, I don't know. But I love the way you presented that retailers should present it. Like we have this option and this usually works for riders and this weight limit, and then kind of steer the direction, because the rider is going to tell the shop at that point which bike they are leaning towards and where they need to be.
Yeah, without having to disclose like a specific weight. And yeah, bringing up, I think you brought up wheels, like a regular everyday customer is not going to know that the weight, even if they know the weight limit of the bike, it's even harder to find the weight limit of wheels. So they're definitely not going to know the weight limit of the wheel set on the bike they're looking at. Like knowing that and being willing to say, hey, something we can do is swap these, or hey, we build custom wheels, it costs this much, and that will help increase the strength of your bike. Talking about, here's what this shock can handle, like being honest about the limitations of a bike, because what's going to happen is like either a person's going to be uncomfortable or worse, they could be unsafe. And so not talking about it is a problem. And I have never had weight come up in a bike shop, and it definitely should have.
Yeah, I feel like when the person's in, purchasing their new bike or talking about it, that's the time to have these honest conversations, not to shy away because we're uncomfortable, but we want the rider. And I would think that I mean, I know me when I'm buying a bike, someone who puts extra effort in to be like, you should really look at this would be good for you, or that's when I want to know about it, not after, right? Like,
Totally. Yeah, not after you bought it or broke a bunch of spokes. The other thing I think is less known by people in smaller bodies, including people who work at bike shops, is like there are components on a bike that don't have a weight limit necessarily, like brakes or pedals, that tend to get worn through more quickly with larger riders. So there's no like hard and fast rule to that, but being able to just reference that and then let the person know like what to look for. It took me probably 3 years of going through brake pads very quickly and people telling me I was braking wrong before I realized I wasn't braking wrong. I was just much heavier than the people I was riding with. And so I was going through them faster. Not a huge deal at all. I just needed to replace them more quickly. And since then, it's never been a problem. Pedals, the same thing. Just let them know they
the
like
bearings on the pedals, Kaylee.
yeah, the bearings will, and if you get, different types of pedals more, and, since then I go for more expensive pedals. I don't have pedal clicks. I don't have problems with the pedals. But I kept buying cheaper nylon pedals because I wanted to buy the cheaper option. And then I was going through them a lot faster. And now I never replace my pedals now that I've gone for the more expensive option. So knowing that up front would have saved me money in the long term.
Kaylee, I'm just thinking, okay, we have retailers who are trying to be like website designers, keep the door open, salespeople, mechanics. I mean, they're wearing so many hats these days. Now I'm asking them, or asking them to make a catalog or to know what products to bring in. Is there like a resource that exists online? I hate to ask you that, but like what if they want to know what are the best products that are out there, or where do they find the best clothing?
I would say clothing, I could give you the brands like off the top of my head. Components, obviously we made the film with Shimano and we're working with them still. And I know a few things that have worked well for me, but we don't have a written resource guide. It's something that's on our to-do list to come out with because we cannot ask bike retailers to also take this on. We need to have readily available things. And we're also, I should say at the same time, encouraging bike companies, bike manufacturers to publish weight limits much more in much easier to find places, and also to make their bikes have higher weight limits in general. So a lot of these things, you can't fault the bike shop. Like it's not easy information to find if it's even there. And so all of that's to say I could, if it makes sense, list a few brands.
I don't know. Do you have some favorites? Why don't you just give me like a couple favorite things? Is that okay?
Yeah. For clothing, I'm an ambassador for Machines for Freedom, so I'll just say that. But I also really do love their clothing, up to a 3XL, which is pretty good. Pearl Izumi has quite a lot of products in a 3XL. I also really like. And then R Sports is a triathlon company, so I know a lot of bike shops probably don't carry them, but they do go to a 6XL. So if you're looking to have clothing for people in a really large range of sizes, R Sports is the one making the largest size padded bike short. And all of those brands are great. And then I like, I ride in flats. I like the Shimano like XT pedals. I have on all my bikes now and haven't had problems a year in, which is a lot longer than I usually go on a pair of pedals. I like the Specialized Mythic saddle the best. I think while I say saddle, I do want to say
we talked about that, right?
Yeah.
We should debunk this myth.
I gotta debunk. I'm sure people in bike shops know this, but people in larger bodies that I talk to often assume that because they have a larger butt, if they do, that they need a wider saddle, and often like a super gel saddle, and
it's
then
like
right?
Kayla?
So big, like a beach cruiser saddle with like an inch of gel, and it's like that. Then they're saying, "Why does my butt hurt?" It's like, well, that is a ton of friction. It's uncomfortable. So anytime you're working with a larger body cyclist, if you could tell them like, you're the size of your behind does not represent the size that your saddle should be, and encouraging them to get a saddle measurement. Like that is gonna make or break people's first few times on a bike. And people leave biking as a sport because they can't figure out the right saddle. So getting people into a correct size with less padding, that is like my life mission.
It's hard though. I remember when I used to be a fitter and, I would have a larger body rider and I'm like, this is the size saddle that you need. And they'd be like, no, that's a little toy. I'm going to break that. And I'm like,
yes.
no, you need this saddle. Trust me.
And saddles have weight limits and the rails break for larger riders. So finding the right saddle can be a challenge, but saddles tend to have less restrictive weight limits than bikes or wheels do. And getting somebody onto the right size saddle is just so crucial to them having a good time. So I can offer my favorite saddles, but everybody's different. And I think just like communicating, like butt size does not equal saddle size is so key.
I would love to see weight limits posted in, more catalogs and more product descriptions online. I think it would be such an asset and really help our industry so much. So I'm going to be a big advocate for that.
Awesome.
But, bringing up the saddle brings up another consideration that I'm thinking about. It's just general fit, comfort on the bike. If I can recall, I think I used to maybe set the handlebars upright a little bit more, so the rider wasn't bending over. Any tips for bicycle retailers who are maybe working with a larger bodied rider to get them fit properly?
Yeah, I see Q factor come up a lot, like width of pedals, if somebody's got a wider hip. I think that can help a lot, as you mentioned, getting the handlebars a bit more upright. I ride in a pretty aggressive position on drop bars, actually. And so I don't know if it's a hard and fast rule, but if you think it's pretty practical that a person in a larger body might carry some extra weight in their stomach area, and then that aggressive leaned over position is going to put their stomach in a position where their leg on the up pedal stroke hits their stomach, that can be very uncomfortable for some people and painful. For me, it's not. So I don't know if it's a rule for everybody. I ride like that and I like it, but I know I would say maybe I'm the exception because more people in larger bodies I find tend to like an H bar, even almost like a beach cruiser, which I have a bike like that and I do like it, or flat bar. Bikes, what's great is if you can find a bike, if somebody comes in and they're a larger body person looking for a gravel bike, maybe offering a bike that can do a flat bar and a gravel bar and a drop bar, letting them have the choice of being able to swap out would be really cool, I think, because I think people want to start upright if they're in a larger body and then find their way, maybe, or maybe never find their way into a drop. But
yeah, no, I'm totally with you. And I even remember some beginner cyclists who would come into the store, they wanted a gravel bike or a road bike. It was the right bike for them. They were really nervous about being down there,
yes,
the drops, and they wanted to start on a flat bar. And then, so yeah, the awesome thing is we can modify these bikes.
Totally.
And as someone gets more fit or gets more into the sport or their body becomes more flexible, that it's a time that we can do that.
Yeah. Another thing I'll mention is that I notice on mountain bikes with the geometry, this isn't something we can fix in a bike shop, but if you've got a more squished bike frame, then the person's body, when they get off the saddle, might have a hard time fitting between the saddle and the bars. And that happens to me on my mountain bike, that my body's kind of too wide front to back. What's nice on my mountain bike is I have a dropper, so I just drop the seat and it's fine. So even offering that to somebody, hey, yeah, you might feel a little uncomfortable with the seat upright. Remember, you can drop it before you get off, and then it's not a problem, So offering little modifications like that. But in general, I have found that bike fit is pretty similar, other than those things we mentioned.
Okay. The big takeaway is for retailers not to be afraid to have the conversation, to set the bike up a special way, or grow with the rider as they grow.
Totally.
If we flip, there's a lot of people who listen to this podcast who aren't in the industry, who are just cycling fans, and they listen, and we might have some people listening, maybe who are larger bodied riders, maybe who are afraid to go into a bicycle store because they don't want to get the look, or, they're just uncomfortable. Any tips for them maybe on how they could make how they can get themselves to go visit their local retailer if they're maybe afraid and they've been buying everything online?
Yeah, I think if you have choices of shops, I live in a town with a lot of bike shops. And so, I ask around, like, where do you go? And I go to the shop that meets my needs. Not that one shop's better than the other. It's just some shops are for some types of cyclists and others are for other types of cyclists, and for me, I do better at kind of an all-around shop that's a little bit more casual, less race oriented. I'm really grateful that those other shops exist, but like they're not bad for me to go to, but there's just one that feels more comfy. So I try to recommend people kind of ask around, but if you've only got one shop, like, I think remember, one, that if somebody is uncomfortable with you or unsure how to treat you, like, it's not because of you. It's like they don't know how to serve you and they're just learning too. I would say that I've been into many, many bike shops, and I've really only had the 2 bad experiences that I mentioned earlier in this chat. So overwhelmingly positive experiences, and finding the right people in a bike shop will like open up your whole world of what's possible on bikes. So finding the right people and the right bike shop for me, like, just makes me feel awesome. Like if something goes wrong with my bike, it's a no-brainer where I take it and who I see, and like building that relationship with the shop is just so awesome. So yeah, I think I understand why people are scared, but that's kind of what I would offer.
Just go for it because the benefits outweigh. Like,
yeah, there are some serious benefits. Like you can't fix everything at home. Even like my husband is a previous bike mechanic and we can't fix everything at home. So
I'm always in the bike store.
Yeah.
What about like a cycling community for larger bodied riders? Like, is there Facebook groups? Is there cycling stuff online? I should have looked. I didn't. Sorry. I just thought.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we've got since the film, we've created a Facebook page called All Bodies on Bikes, a Facebook group that anybody can join. So people of all sizes. It is awesome, and I don't say that because we made it. We do very little. It's just an amazing group of people that post their rides, and other people hype them up, or they ask questions, and it's like the most positive online community I've ever seen, with no thanks to us. We did nothing other than like make the page.
Anyone can join, like if a bicycle retailer, because I'm sure they talk about products.
Yes, anyone should, and we really encourage bike retailers, bike industry to join so they can see the types of questions people are asking and the type of people who are riding. Because I mean, it has taught me that just in general, the diversity of types of riding that's happening and what people are doing and the types of bikes they're on. I mean, it's grown since the film came out. I think it's well over 1,500 members now. We also have an Instagram page, also called All Bodies on Bikes. And then there are a few other Facebook groups that we're not in charge of. There's one called Fat Bottom Girls, that's just for women, and similarly positive community. So there's a couple out there. Our personal Instagram pages, we try to like hype other people up too. So, we're working on kind of building out what the online community looks like. And then at the same time, as COVID hopefully is like getting less and less prevalent, we can be doing more in-person rides and traveling around, or having other people who live in different places host group rides. So those are the communities that we're aware of. Like, we kind of started this work because we didn't see a lot of online community in this space for people in larger bodies. So it's growing, but it's just getting started too.
Yeah, I love this. So is it a closed Facebook group or is it open one?
It's like you have to get accepted, but everybody gets accepted. Yeah.
All bodies
so that no scammers join.
We don't want any scammers, but any retailers listening, any staff members, All Bodies on Bikes, join that group. You can just I'm sure there's going to be so much you can learn in there.
Totally.
And, I'm thinking about what you said about traveling around and, as we're able to, I think about all the ambassadors we've seen over the years for products, right? And it's all the typical racer, right? So I would love for you to come to like a retailer and have an event. How cool would that be? So definitely.
Awesome. Yeah.
Any awesome, fantastic cycling advice that you've been given throughout your career that you want to share with our listeners and viewers?
Yeah, I think it comes from outside of the cycling world and from this space of like intuitive eating and joyful movement, it's called. It's like kind of a practice of nutritionists and fitness folks. Just the idea that we should move our bodies in ways that feel good and bring us joy. And that's what we tried to center in the film. I hope we did that. That's what I try to do when I bike now, is to center joy and focus on the joy of riding a bike rather than some of the other aspects of the sport that we focused on that are great too. But I think joy speaks to more people than going fast or doing rad stuff or trying really hard.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Just being out there, right? Just the sense of the journey and what it can do for us.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you could sum it up, like say this was our guide to the industry. We've been talking about, at the NBDA, we've been talking about bicycle retailer excellence and what that looks like in a lot of different categories, but we haven't really talked about what excellence looks like in the needs of like addressing the needs of larger body customers. So if you could sum that up, what would excellence in retail look like in this category?
I think the key is to treat everybody with respect and to invite everyone into the biking community. And then like the cherry on top would be like being ready with the right advice and then even further having the right products in store.
Yeah, so that's what we need. That's our homework, retailers and listeners. We need to make sure we have the products or at least the knowledge. And then, like we said very earlier in the conversation, I loved how you gave the nugget of like having photos of larger bodied riders and letting people know that you're accepting to all cyclists, whatever that means, right? So, I know you spoke a little bit about Shimano and Machines for Freedom, and I think another one of your sponsors is Kona.
Yep.
It's like wonderful for them to support you, and I'm very thankful for them stepping up for our industry to make this possible. What is next? Like any big plans? Can you give us anything?
I wish I had more to give you. I have so many weddings to attend that got in the way of biking this summer. Marley and I are going to be hosting some group rides and some overnight bike packing trips, which is really exciting, later this summer and early into the fall. And, in the next year, I'm hoping to finish my PhD and then ride my big goals, the Great Divide, and maybe the Oregon Timber Trail. So those are the big trips I've got on my radar, but right now they're probably a year away.
I love that. So I know you have a website. I think it's awesome for listeners. If you want to visit her website, it's KayleeKornhauser.com. That's KaileyKornhauser.com. And, we spoke about a lot of the things like that, Kaylee, that we could have gotten into a lot more specifics. So products, brands, tips. Can retailers reach out to you? Are you okay if someone wanted to send you an email or?
Absolutely. Always happy to answer questions one-on-one. We can do workshops, whatever is needed for your space and for your stores.
I think that's amazing. Like I said, I'm going to continue to share the work you've done. I'll share the Shimano video with everyone I come across. I hope retailers listen to the podcast today and they take away some really good little tips on how to make their retail location more accepting and open. And Kaylee, we just thank you so much for your support of the NBDA and your willingness to come on and chat with me. And congratulations again on the marriage.
Thank you so much for having me and for this platform, and for folks listening, thanks for listening.
Well, I will catch up with you later. Again, if you have not visited her website, please check it out. Reach out to me with any specific questions. I can also get them over to Kaylee. And thanks to Shimano and Kona and Machines for Freedom for the support of Kaylee to keep her going. And I guess I'll chat with you later. We're going to make a plan to go ride, right?
Yep.
See you later. Bye now.